Okay, in this video lesson, what we're going to do is pick up right where we left off in the last lesson. We're going to take our Windows application and expand it. We're going to get into controls. Now, what's a control? Well, come on, we've all used Windows user interfaces, or if we work in some other platform, of course, some sort of visual, graphical interface.
That's right.
And a control is nothing but a button, a slider, a text
This
field.
stuff right up here.
Yeah,
Toolbars.
Everything there
Everything
is a control.
there. Yep.
They're basically the things that the user is going to
Interact with.
Ooh, nice. So anyways, in this lesson, we're going to focus on the creation of buttons, list controls, and text controls. We're also going to focus on how to handle control layout.
Yep.
Getting these things set up on your frame or on your window, how
Right.
they're laid out. And also, we're going to go a little bit further than that. We're going to talk about, what is it, the box sizer.
Right.
So we can see how we can force controls to resize
With the window.
with the window.
Right.
Yeah, so some really cool things in this lesson. Joel?
All right, so the first thing we're going to do is create our own subclass of WXFrame. So create our own version of WXFrame that holds the buttons that we want to do. So for this, we're going to create a separate header file, and we're just going to call this the mainframe, which is going to be our mainframe header. So mainframe. And inside this header file, we're going to create basically the template, as we did in the first few VTMs, the template for our WXFrame subclass. So as we did before, probably are all very tired of this. I am too. So you define the mainframe and then endif. So make sure that it's only defined once. And we're going to include the wx.h, a header file in here so that it knows what a WXFrame actually is. And we're going to create the class called class mainframe, and it's going to inherit from WXFrame. So we create this. Now, we're going to overload pretty much only one function, that's the constructor. So we're going to say mainframe. Well, actually, let me make sure it is case sensitive. So the first thing is going to be the title that we're going to pass this control, as we did before. So the title, followed by the position where it's going to be placed, and finally the sizer, which is going to specify how large the window is. Now it's declared as constant and a reference just because there's no need to recreate a control, an instance of it, and it's constant because we're not going to be changing it inside the control. Now, so with that set, let's just save that and create a new item, which is going to be our source file for the mainframe object, or a class, if you will. So mainframe. So now all we need to do is create the file. So first thing we need to do is include the mainframe.h file. So we got that included. Now all we're doing is overloading the constructor. So let's just go into mainframe and say mainframe. And the first thing, as the pop-up here shows, is wxstring and title. I could copy it, but I like typing, so.
Sure you do.
Yes, I do. And we just pass it size. Now, as I believe we did before, we can have the colon operator here, which allows us to call, say, set basic variables, or call the default constructor, etc. In this case, we're going to call the default constructor for WXFrame. I'm sorry, not the default constructor, the regular constructor that we called before in the last lesson. And we're going to pass it as before, WXFrame, and we're going to just be null because we are our own parent. There is no parent. Pass it title, which is passed to this frame right here. And if you want me to slow down, just let me know.
No, you're doing great.
Pass it the position, which was also passed to us, and finally, pass it the size. So that creates the main constructor is going to create all that default stuff for us. But now what we need to do is create the actual buttons, etc. that we need. But that's going to be put inside of here. So we can put a comment that says, this is where we create custom controls. This is where we're going to create the actual controls. So with that said, let's just save this. Go back to Hello World. Now, Hello World, instead of creating a new frame, new WX frame, we're going to be creating a new mainframe because that's our own custom WX frame. So to do that, we're going to need to include our Hello World, mainframe.h. So we included that guy. Now, instead of creating a new frame, we're going to create a new mainframe. Can't spell it, eh? That's okay. The title is going to be, what do you want it to be, Buzz? Control example. Thank you for that awesome input.
You're very welcome.
And we won't need to pass a style because we're not passing a style in this case. We're just going to use the default style. And remember, for the pointer, it's going to be a main frame pointer, and we'll just call it frame. The rest is all going to be the same.
Right.
So let's just go ahead and build this, make sure everything works right, because I almost definitely made some sort of spelling error somewhere. Cannot access private member declared in. Okay, no worries. What we do is go over to here, and what we need to do is just declare this as public.
And that should do the trick, and very nice. Here it comes. Yes, yes.
Yes.
Nice.
So everything works right, and it should be exactly the same as before, right?
Right.
So if we run this, it's exactly the same as before.
Well, the title's changed.
The title's changed, but other than that. Now what we want to do is create controls inside of this. And now, this is also a really cool part about WX widgets, is it's very, very easy to add things. Let's say we wanted to add a simple button. Okay, so we can say WX button, and then we can just call this, let's say, button OK. So this is going to be an OK button. And we're going to create a new WX button. And what needs to be passed? Well, this is where the help file comes in handy. We need to know what needs to be passed to WX button. So if we come over to here, go over to contents, and under index, just type in WX button. And double click on this. Just double click here. And what we need to do is we need to know the constructor, what arguments it's looking for. So it's looking for a parent, a window ID, the string, which is going to be what's displayed, OK, cancel, whatever. Position, size, just like before, and we can leave the style, etc. out, just like we did with the window. So, kind of move this out of the way. So the first thing is going to be the parent. Now, who do we want the parent to be? This, because this is me, right? This is the main frame. And the ID, in this case, we could just pass it -1, because we don't really need to reference it anyway. And then what we need to do, if I just go back here, just so you guys can continue looking at this, we need a label. So, _T, followed by OK. I know, fancy. And then the position. So let's put this maybe, I don't know, 60 into the window and 60 down. Seems I use 60 a lot. And then the size, say 100 by 50. So fairly big control. Now, for this to work, we actually just need to do that, because we've already declared it. And if I compile this, if I didn't make any syntax errors, it's linking. And if I run this, check it out. It covers the entire window. Now the reason for this is because we don't have some other container inside of the window. So it contains the entire thing. By default, what you need to do to create an actual layout is create a panel. A panel holds controls. That's the idea. So a panel holds controls inside of that, and that's where we can use the box sizer, as Buzz was mentioning before, to make it so that the controls automatically resize when you resize the window. So right now, it does work, but it's not exactly the size we specified.
No.
Not at all. So let's exit this out, and let's create the main panel that I was talking about. So we can come in here and say WX panel, and we'll call this main panel. And as before, you'll notice that we kind of get the same pattern here. The first one's going to be the parent, which is this, and then the ID, then followed by the position. However, the position in this case is rather irrelevant, so what we can do is come to WX. I want to just show you again what it says inside of here. So come over to WX panel, and if we come down to the constructor, the position, if you do not specify, it will use WX default position and WX default size. So as you can see down here, a value of -1, -1 indicates a default size chosen by either the windowing system or WX widgets, depending on the platform. So in this case, we can just use the default sizes. So we can just exit that. Now, to make the button be put inside of the main panel, what do we need to do? Just change the parent to equal main panel. And that's it. So if we just compile this, we get our button at the correct location, and you can press it in the correct size. Yeah.
Nice.
So there's that. Now let me create a simple layout here. Just creating a few controls. We're going to create text control on the top here, followed by an add button, and then we're going to have a big list control, which lists various items, and we'll also show how to add items into that list, etc. So let's exit that out. Of course, all the controls we create in this lesson aren't going to actually be able to do anything. That's all going to be in the next lesson and the lesson after that, where we handle events, which is a completely separate topic. So the first thing is, let's create the add button that we're talking about, so button add. And we do exactly like we did below. Create the button. It's going to be inside the main panel. And no ID. And we'll just say T add. And we'll put this at the very top as we did before. So we can say, well, not as we did before, but in the top left corner. And WX size, we'll give it the same size as this one. One more parenthesis there. After this one, I'm going to probably speed up just a little bit because you guys kind of get the idea. It's going to
become very repetitive.
Yes, it's going to become very repetitive. So we get 2 buttons here. Simple enough. Now, what if, say, I wanted to make this button span all the way across to the left and make sure that when I resize this window, it automatically resizes with it? That's where a box sizer comes along. Now, let me just bring back up this class diagram here. And you'll notice that we have the WX control, and subclass of this is all the controls we can create. So you can see that we have a checkbox, a combo box, a list control, which we'll use in a second, a spin button, slider, etc. All these things we can use to create. And a box sizer, which I don't exactly know where, but it is in here, I do promise. WX sizer right here. So you have a static box sizer, you have a notebook sizer, etc. We're going to use a box sizer, which allows us to basically have either horizontal or vertical sizing. So let's come back over into here, and let's create our sizer. So let's come to here and say WX box sizer, capital S. And this is going to be called the main sizer. And we're going to say new WX box sizer. And we're going to create a vertical layout because we want everything to be, vertically. So we're going to call it WX vertical. And this is a constant that is defined inside of WX widget. So WX vertical, all set there. Now for the main sizer to actually work, we need to add the controls that are relevant into that control. So we'll say main sizer, and main syntax today. Main sizer arrow add. So we're going to add a control into the main sizer.
Right.
And this one is going to be button add. So we want to add this button into the sizer. And in this case, we're just going to pass it a size of 0. The second operation here is basically whether or not the control is going to be stretched, the proportion of it. And in this case, 0 means it's not going to stretch it. It's just going to move it.
Right.
So if we specify WX center and pass it 0 at the end, again, we can come over into the help file. I won't do this constantly, but I think it's important. We can come over to, let me come over to box sizer, and just come into here. And if we just go to the WX sizer, as you can see, there's only these extra things added to a box sizer. So if we go to a WX sizer and go to the constructor, note the WX sizers are blah, 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 blah. And what we want is the add, right?
Right.
So the second one is proportion, as I was telling you before. And the next one is flag. So in this case, we're using center, which means we want the control center. And finally, we have border, which specifies where the border is going to be. Do you want on the top, say, a width of 5 between the controls, that kind of thing. So we have the border. And finally, WX object user data just allows you to pass extra data. In this case, we don't need it whatsoever. It's special cases. So we just add this into here. And this is going to be the border. We'll set it to 0. That's fine. So
basically your add button is not going to resize, but it's going to be centered now.
Right. But there's one thing I almost forgot. If we run this right now, notice that nothing's happening. It's exactly the same as what before.
Well, where's this? Let's go back to the code.
Yes.
Okay.
So what we need to do is...
Well, where's the box sizer at?
It's right here. Well, we're never really associating it with the
your
frame.
window. Yeah.
That's right. So it doesn't really know what to use.
My question, where's it at? Well, it's just kind of floating out there in memory.
That's right. So what we need to do is say main panel, which is this guy right here, the control inside. We need to say what it wants to use. Well, we're going to say set auto layout, which takes control of everything, and set that to true. So it goes, oh, so now I'm supposed to lay out everything automatically. And then main panel, we need to say which sizer we want to use, as Buzz was saying. So set sizer equal to main sizer. And if we just compile that guy, check it out. Add is automatically staying centered inside the window, whereas OK, because we didn't add it into the sizer, is still kind of out in la la land doing its own thing.
Right.
So if I wanted to make, let's say, it stretch proportionally, what would I do? Change this to 1. Check this out.
Your button's going to go all the way from the left to the right-hand side. Straight from the top to the bottom. Whoops.
So basically what I have here is it's only centering it vertically because it's a vertical.
Vertical, that's right.
That's right. So if I wanted to say make it stretch in all, I could do something like WX grow, which means I want it to grow everywhere. So let's just compile that. And check it out. It fills the entire window now because the other control that we created, cancel, isn't part of this WXizer, so it doesn't even know it exists.
Great. So we went all the way back to where we were
originally. Before, right. So if we wanted to change this around, let's just copy this line here and add button OK. Now check this out. They both have a proportion of 1, which means they're going to distribute.
Right, split it. There you
they're
go.
exactly split.
Very
so
nice.
this makes complete sense if you think about it. So now what we want to do is on the very top create text control. So what we can do is, let's see here, create the text control, yada yada. So actually what I want to do first is create the list box that we were talking about. How to create the list box that has a list of items.
Okay.
Duh. So list box equals new WX list box. We might want to declare it as well. So WX list box pointer list box equals new WX list box, and again pass it the main panel, the ID followed by in this case, because it's a list box, it doesn't have a caption, does it? So we don't need to pass it what we did here, a template add or whatever. So we just pass it the position. And again, the position is not going to be absolutely critical here because we're using a sizer. So in fact, we can say WX default position. Because we've been doing this, really the only thing that matters is the size, because the position is automatically calculated.
Right.
So what we can do here is, let's say the size, I want it to be a width of 100 and a height of 500 or something.
Okay.
Oh, maybe 300, a little bit less. So we've created that. Now, if we want to add items into the list box, it's very, very simple. All we need to do is call it, list box, arrow, and then insert. Insert an item into the list box. Simple enough. And let's say we want to insert, I don't know, underscore T, hello, and that's it. So very fancy there. You can also, the second parameter is where you want to insert it. Again, let's come back to WX widgets and come over to here. And if we come to our WX list box, you'll notice that, actually I wanted to insert, my bad, sorry. Come over to display, just scroll down a little bit, and you'll notice we have insert items, but in this case we want the list box is a subset of list control, so we come back to list control and we want to insert an item. So if we just scroll all the way down, insert item, you'll notice that we can pass the index, which is where we want to pass it to, followed by the label that we want to pass it by. Inserts an item returning the index of the new item if successful. That's just a list item. That's not what we're creating. This is inserts a string item. You can insert an image, etc., etc. So we need to specify an index into it. So in this case, what we want to do is just an index of 0. So it's going to insert it at position 0, and we just end that off. Simple enough. And finally, we have to add it into the main sizer. So main sizer, yada yada, add, and then list box. We're going to have him grow as well, so that's cool. Of course, the WX center is no longer absolutely necessary because we're stretching through the entire thing anyway. I'm sorry, this has changed. Sometimes you'll find that there's kind of discrepancies between the two. Don't worry about it. It's supposed to be the label followed by the index where you're putting it at. So if we want to just put it at position 0, just compile it. So there we are. If we run this, you'll notice now we have hello, and then the add and other button. Now if we didn't want this to grow, we can just take this out. And what you would get is simply the box centered, just as we did with the button. So we get something like that. Now it actually uses the width and height that we were talking about before, which is awesome. I'm sorry, just the width of the thing that we're using.
Right.
So let's just exit this out. And now let's make it so that basically it does not grow for the buttons, because the buttons should stay about the same size. They shouldn't really grow all that much. So we're going to change this guy to use WX center, and this WX center, and we'll just set this to 0 and this to 0 so that they don't really stretch, and that should work fine. Now, one other thing, the reason I'm creating this, just so you guys know, is so we can have sort of an interface to base off on the next lesson that we can add events to. So we have the add button. One other control that I would like to create is the text control, where we can actually input text. So what I'm going to do is come over, let's say up to here, and of course commenting is a good thing, so if you feel the urge, please do comment. WX control, and we'll just call this text control. Will equal a new WX text control. This is just like any other text control dialog where you can type text into it. So we have text control, and we pass it the main panel, which is the parent, and the index, and then the default text is going to be placed inside. Of course, we need to use the _t just for completeness. I'll just put something like nothing into it. And finally, we can just put this at the very top, so main sizer dot add, and then we'll just pass this guy text control. And we will have it not resize, and we'll center it. So there. So let's compile this, and we should... Oh, I spelled it wrong. No worries. So we get this. Very, very scary stuff. But what if we wanted to just stretch it out like we kind of did before? That's no problem whatsoever. All we need to do is say we want it to grow, but only in the left and right. And we can do that. Let's take the add as an example. We can say WX grow, and then pass it instead of center, which causes it to kind of stretch top and bottom as well. What we're going to do is pass this WX left, which will kind of slap it onto the side. As you can see here, it doesn't change the height when I resize it, but now it stretches left and right. So if I change the height of this guy, it will change and stay that way. So, let me kind of just do one more thing, just kind of make it a little bit more interesting. Move this around so that you have the control on the top, followed by the add button, followed by the list box, so you can see something like this. And maybe we make this look a little bit better, because it looks kind of...
I'd say we need to make our text control up top stretch all the way across. We need to... add button can stay like that. Let's go ahead and make our list control stretch all the way across, and, well, probably the OK as well.
Yes, probably the OK
so that
as
everything just kind of fills in the entire
right, because now it looks kind of...
funny.
Yeah, funny. So what we can do is the list box as well. So we can say WX grow, which will just make it go in every direction. And for the button OK, just do like we did with the add. So WX grow, and then WX left. And for the text control as well, WX grow, WX left, and kind of build that. And if we run this, you'll notice that it looks a whole lot better. Now, one other thing I want to mention here is that the border, we didn't really talk about this, so we're changing the control here. Let's say give it a side border of 50. Now, if we run this, just one second, you'll notice that this just bumped over 50. We can take this away. You'll notice we have WX grow right now, just WX grow. And because we don't have proportions set up, it will still stretch across without the left. The WX left is simply specifying in which direction we want to have a border. So if I said WX all with a border of 50, what it's going to do is it's going to have 50 pixels around the whole thing.
Right.
So you have something like that.
Right.
So basically that's where we can end, and in the next 2 lessons we'll add event handling, so that when I press add, it actually adds whatever's in here into the list and so forth.
Sounds good.
All right.
So that's going to wrap up this lesson. Thanks.